Geralt, how are things?
When I decided to take a risk and start a Witcher channel in the year 2021, there was one specific video on my list of planned content ideas that I knew was going to be a unique challenge. I say that because what I'm covering today might be the single best example of when things just spiraled out of control as I was looking for easily missed or rare details in the Witcher games. As I've mentioned in my previous few videos, in preparation for launching this channel, I have just spent some time really trying to break the will of The Witcher 3, just experimenting and trying to do things in unlikely ways for the sake of seeing what crazy things the developers thought to account for. With that said, today's video is all about one specific quest I have pushed to the limits, that being the Lord of Undvik, and if you don't remember, this is the quest where Geralt is asked by Crach on Craite to help his son Hjalmar, who has sailed off in the hopes of slaying an ice giant. I want to point out that the Lord of Undvik was the very first quest ever designed for The Witcher 3, and I do think it shows in some ways. It's a very unusual quest for many reasons, and in addition to being the first quest ever developed for The Witcher 3, the Lord of Undvik is also the most complex quest in all of Skellige. I say complex not in terms of the storyline because it's pretty straightforward in that regard. No, I mean complex in terms of the sheer amount of moving parts this quest has, and the absurd combination of circumstances the devs accounted for when it comes to players completing this quest. When I use the word absurd, I really mean it. I had to replay not only this quest, but also Cerys' quest on Speakerog so many times in order to properly exhaust all possibilities. The Lord of Undvik, and we're taking a turn here, but the Lord of Undvik is a quest that can be completed without it ever actually being a quest, which kind of doesn't make sense, but I will keep talking until it does. At the end of the very first main quest when you arrive in Skellige, Crach will ask Geralt to help his children, Cerys and Hjalmar, and then tells Geralt where they've headed off to. Of course, you don't have to help them, these are secondary quests, but from the end of the first main Skellige quest onward, if Geralt decides to help Hjalmar or Cerys, he will already know what they're up to when he meets them. One of the many interesting things about Hjalmar's quest specifically is that if you elect to avoid the first thing you are directed to do in Skellige, which is to speak to Yennefer and then go to the feast, and instead you head straight to Undvik, you can find Hjalmar and help him kill the ice giant without ever actually having spoken to Crach, which provides for a bunch of unique dialogue options both during and after the quest. However, I am using the word quest a little bit loosely here, because the game will never actually give you the quest or any objective markers if you do things in this way. It forces you to just blunder through things if you don't know exactly what you're doing, but sailing straight to Undvik does make for some really interesting changes, including a bunch of overhauled dialogue. This quest in general can be pretty buggy even if you're doing things the way the devs intended most players to complete them, but when you do things in this order, some of the issues this quest already does have become even more apparent, although I will spare you the vast majority of the bugs I ran into because they aren't even worth talking about, they just got really repetitive. Now, the details that spring up from doing the Lord of Undvik without actually having it be a quest are only going to make up like 50% of what I show you guys in this video, because I have plenty of other cool things this quest has to offer depending on many factors, such as how you sequence things with Cerys. Okay, finally, let's dive into this quest, and again, I'm using the word quest loosely and I will continue to do so. For the sake of this video not being a total mess, I am going to structure it in the order the quest is supposed to go and cover the details as they appear. So that means we start with the intended beginning on the island, visiting the stranger in the boat, who sadly, we are just going to come back to later. If you just show up on the island without being given the quest, nothing too interesting changes during your first encounter with this guy. You just have less dialogue options and can't ask about Hjalmar like you usually can, but rest assured we will come back to this guy because there's a lot of things going on with him that are pretty interesting. Anyway, after you leave, you find Hjalmar's camp. In a normal game, Geralt will comment on the discovery, saying this:
Hjalmar's encampment. They were attacked.
However, if you're in a game where you don't know Hjalmar is on the island yet, Geralt won't say anything. At this camp, you can investigate leads to the left or to the right, and this is where I think a lot of players end up missing a third of the quest, because if you go left, it will eventually take you to Hjalmar and you'll never even know what you skipped. But for this video, we are going to the right. You do some investigating, eventually enter a system of caves with a bunch of trolls, and if you go the correct direction, you'll stumble upon a few chef trolls cooking up the man you've been tracking, who is still alive inside the pot. You can either fight the trolls for the man's life or answer a riddle correctly, and by the way, if you just sit around and keep getting the riddles wrong because you get multiple chances with different riddles, he will eventually just die in the pot.
A corpse. In that case,
Soulbreak!
Damn it. That took too long.
Anyway, this is where the big changes begin. You've rescued Folan, the warrior in the pot who was traveling with Hjalmar before they were separated, and directly after the rescue you have an unskippable conversation with this guy. Usually, if you were given the quest by Crach, this is how the beginning of the conversation goes.
You saved my life. How can I thank you?
I'm looking for Hjalmar.
Hjalmar? Curious where he is myself. Him and the whole crew. Something must have happened. Otherwise he'd have come looking for me after I went missing that night. I know he would have. Wait now. Why are you looking for Hjalmar?
Under the circumstances in which you sail directly to Undvik instead of going to the feast, Geralt will instead have no idea who Folan is or what's going on, which makes for a totally unique interaction.
You saved my life. How can I thank you?
Thank me with a story. What are you doing on Undvik?
Sailed here with Hjalmar and Craite aiming to kill the ice giant. We were to take its head, take back the isle, then bask in the glory, but
Things not go according to plan?
I've no notion where the others are. Those that survived, that is.
Much of the rest of this conversation is the same, like when Geralt asks about the ice giant and how Hjalmar's men were separated. All of that dialogue is either unchanged, or in some cases it's like the situation with the stranger where you just have less options because Geralt doesn't know certain things. However, one interesting change that has other consequences later is that normally Folan would ask about Cerys after you tell him that Crach sent you. You can tell him about what she's up to and where she is, and Folan will then ask if she's returned. If you haven't helped Cerys, Geralt will say this.
Has she come back? Do you know?
Hadn't returned when I left Ard Skellige.
And if you have, this is what happens.
Has she come back? Do you know?
Yeah, she's back. Did what she set out to do, too.
Thank the gods.
But if you sail to Undvik without going to the feast where you meet Cerys, you aren't able to tell Folan anything about her, which changes some dialogue later in the mission. From here, you set out to find Hjalmar, either with Folan as your companion if you rescued him, or without if you didn't. Just as an aside, one of the coolest things about having Folan as a companion is that when Geralt inspects the dead bodies of Hjalmar's men alongside the path you follow and through the caves, if Folan isn't with him, Geralt will just say some generic thing about their wounds. If you did rescue Folan though, he will identify each of the dead warriors Geralt inspects, which is a really nice touch.
Fought to the bitter end.
Thorsten,
Hjalmar lost a lot of men here.
Arvid and Torderach. He was dead set on coming with us.
From this point onward, no other real changes occur until you get to Hjalmar, and then things get really complicated. Eventually, you'll find Hjalmar fighting a couple of sirens, and I want to point out that it is totally possible for the quest to begin here for some players. But that is neither here nor there. You get to Hjalmar, help him kill the sirens, and then have a conversation. This conversation can change greatly depending on about a dozen different factors. We will start with a scenario where you have Folan with you, as Folan himself even has differences in his dialogue here. Under normal circumstances where you were sent to help Hjalmar, and Geralt rescues Folan and tells him about what Cerys is up to, Folan will begin this conversation by telling Hjalmar about Cerys.
Folan! I was sure you died. Where have you been?
Cerys has gone to Speakerog, alone. Couldn't wait, no. Had to sneak off, as if you were afeard of someone would steal the giant out from under you.
Cerys! She staked a claim to the throne then. And you'd have rather gone with her.
I'd have liked to have the choice.
Folan will tell Hjalmar this whether you told him Cerys had returned or not. This always happens if you went to the feast and then rescued Folan / told him why you're there and what Cerys was up to. However, if you just sailed to Undvik without going to the feast, Folan never asks and Geralt never tells him about Cerys because he doesn't know. He hasn't even met Cerys up until that point. So Folan has a completely different interaction with Hjalmar here.
Folan! Thought you died. What happened? Where did you go?
What's happened is that you should have listened to me when I told you not to take Agnar. But you don't listen to anyone. Know what he did? Stole the Hornwall horn. Put the whole crew at risk. I followed him.
Alone? You should have woken me. I'd have listened to you then. But instead...
If you have Folan with you, once this conversation turns to Geralt, it remains the same regardless of whether you're doing the quest the normal way, or you're doing the quest when it's not actually a quest, which I thought was really weird, and I have something extra cool to share here. If Folan has been rescued, once Hjalmar turns to Geralt, he always says the same two things. You have the option to ask how Hjalmar knows you because he recognizes you on sight, and then you can ask where the rest of his crew is, and in the current build of the game, this is how that response goes.
Where's the rest of your crew?
Fought our way through a swarm of sirens to get here. Only a handful of us left after that battle. Now we're but 3. The sirens tore Leif up good. We should see to his wounds.
He's dead.
Because I strongly felt there was something wrong here, I did some digging into this part of the quest. Keep in mind, if you have been sent by Crach and save Folan before going to Hjalmar, you never even tell him why you're there or that his dad sent you, and as we'll see in a minute, you do tell Hjalmar that if you show up without Folan, so I just felt like something was off here and wanted to dig into it. As it turns out, there is different dialogue that exists in the files of the game, it's just completely broken and doesn't activate for some reason. That said, this can be fixed by modding the game to reactivate the dialogue that's supposed to be there, but is just bugged for some reason. And when you do fix it, the lines about Hjalmar's crew are completely different.
Where's the rest of your crew?
Good question.
Fought our way through a swarm of sirens to get here. Only a handful of us left after the battle on the lake. Good thing you showed up when you did, because Leif's wounds need tending. Those bitches tore him up good. But I suppose if it had all gone smoothly, it would have made for a dreadfully short ballad about our heroic adventure.
Seems more doomed than heroic to me.
No, that's just the gods looking to see what metal we're made of. They'll soon get their answer.
Not only that, you now have a third dialogue option where you can tell Hjalmar that Crach sent you while Folan is there, and this interaction is also unique.
Your father sent me to find you.
I have a giant to defeat. Head home soon as I've done that. Gotta help Leif first.
Leif's dead.
This is the type of thing that maybe can be fixed in the Enhanced Edition. I'll definitely be looking out to see if this and other bugs I know of are fixed. That said, let's move on to the scenario where Geralt meets Hjalmar alone because he didn't rescue Folan. In this scenario, Hjalmar will always introduce himself and Geralt will do the same. If you're alone, Hjalmar won't know who you are until you tell him, and he even goes on to say that he thought Geralt was dead, which makes it a little weird that he just knows Geralt by name on sight if you're with Folan. I can't really think of a decent explanation for why that would be. Anyway, the conversation changes from here depending on whether you attended the feast or you didn't. If you're doing the quest normally, Geralt will say this when Hjalmar asks why he's on Undvik.
Your father sent me. He needs you on Skellige.
Impossible. Dad knows I'll not return till I kill the giant.
Situation's changed. The fate of all Skellige will be decided on Skellige. They're getting ready to choose a new king.
The fate of Skellige is being decided here. If I accomplish this deed, it'll mean the gods have chosen me to rule.
The other claimants are already waiting at Kaer.
Seems I must hurry then. Time to face the giant. Coming with?
Alternatively, if you just show up without the quest being given to you, Geralt has a unique response for that scenario.
Visiting the Isle.
Very amusing, Geralt of Rivia. Everyone knows a true brute's taken over Undvik, the ice giant, who I've come here to defeat.
By the way, I do realize that Hjalmar says Undvik, Geralt and most other characters say Undvik, so I guess I'll just be consistent with one pronunciation. Anyway, something else that I thought was really interesting is that this scenario where Geralt shows up without being given the quest is the only one where Geralt can suggest he won't be helping Hjalmar at the end of their conversation. If you're with Folan, regardless of whether you just showed up on Undvik or were given the quest, you don't even get a conversation option. Hjalmar will just tell you what you're going to do. If you show up by yourself doing the quest the normal way, you do get conversation options, but they boil down to yes and yes with extra steps. However, in the scenario where Geralt just sailed to Undvik without the quest and you didn't rescue Folan, you do have the option to not agree to help, although it doesn't really change anything long term.
The ice giant, who I've come here to defeat.
Not about to stop you.
Then perhaps you'd like to join me? With my crew gone, I could use a body at my side. And poor Leif.
Leif's dead.
One more thing I did want to add about this part of the mission is that if you decide to just ditch them after the conversation ends and run away instead of following them to the giant's cave, both Hjalmar and Folan have extra lines where they'll call after you.
I'll wait at the cave entrance.
I'll make sure that madman don't run at the giant all alone.
From here onward, the fight with the giant isn't affected by whether you're doing the quest normally or not. If you have Folan with you, he will help fight the giant, of course, and you can also save Vigi or just let him die. And the cutscene following the fight has 4 variants, depending on if you let Folan and Vigi die, saved both, or just one of the two. There's a variant cutscene for each. The conversation after the fight when you're on the docks can be drastically different depending on how you went about this quest. In a normal game where Crach sent you, you will have a long conversation about the Skellige throne, and you also discuss Cerys. If you rescued Folan, Hjalmar brings her up because Folan told him earlier, and if you didn't, Geralt brings her up. If you're in a game where you haven't helped Cerys yet, Hjalmar will ask you to give her a hand, and if you've already completed Possession, which is the Help Cerys quest, you can tell Hjalmar she's already back, safe and sound.
And Cerys? She back yet?
Yeah, and she did what she set out to do on Speakerog.
She always liked competing with me. Except so far I've always won.
After Hjalmar asks about Cerys, the conversation ends in a normal playthrough. That said, if you just showed up on Undvik without being given the quest, all of this is completely different. Geralt and Hjalmar have a totally different conversation because Geralt doesn't know anything about Cerys or the crown, or even that Hjalmar is on Undvik to prove himself.
Gonna head back to Skellige?
Aye. Need to make it known. Tell all how bravely my boys fought. Make their families proud. A great many true warriors perished, but victory was ours. The folk of Undvik can go home.
Think everyone will see it that way?
I'm prepared to take responsibility for their deaths. I was in charge of the expedition, and they all believed in me. Laid their trust in me.
Farewell on Craite.
Thanks for your help, Witcher. I have a distinct sensation, won't say where, that we'll meet again.
Now, to tie up a few loose ends, if you ignored Folan and didn't rescue him, you can head back to the caves after the quest is over and find out that he is dead and the chef trolls did what they set out to do. Also, to return to the old man in the boat, I know that I see all over the place that this guy is totally bugged and doesn't have an ending, but he actually has two, they're just a little bit finicky. After you kill the giant, you can return to the guy, tell him the giant is dead, and get one of two endings. If you want to tell him about the giant, you do have to go straight there after killing it. If you fast travel or leave the island in any way, he will just disappear from the boat and never show up again. Anyway, what ending you get with this guy is totally dependent on whether or not you've uncovered his true identity. If you get the quest as expected from Crach, the first objective before going to Undvik is to go down to the nearby inn and speak to a few Undvik warriors who were ran off the island. One of them, his name is Axel, will tell you all about the Jarl of Undvik.
Jarl of Undvik. Tell me about his death.
His whole crew died that night. Hjalmar, Wilfred, and Wilhelm.
Having this conversation, which doing the quest a normal way you would unless you ignore your first objective, allows you to guess that the old man in the boat is actually Harold, the Jarl of Undvik. If you do this and then return to tell him the ice giant is dead, you will get this ending for Harold.
I killed the giant.
Killed him? Did what my whole crew couldn't? Hear that, lads? Are you not ashamed?
When you're done talking to yourself, sail back to Skellige with me. Your people have found shelter there, and you're still their leader.
Oh, aye. They can come back now. Look alive, crew. We've got to hurry. Got a finisher? Oh, she'll be a lovely vessel. Perfect for a funeral.
However, if you just sail to Undvik without being assigned the quest, or you just don't have the conversation in the inn that allows you to guess who he is, you will get a slightly more pessimistic ending for him.
When you're done talking to yourself, sail back to Skellige with me. Refugees from Undvik. They've found a safe haven there.
Aye. They all fled. See, I promised me crew we'd not leave the isle, and we've still got work to do. Oh, she'll be a lovely longship when we're done.
I really do think there was supposed to be more with this guy that was eventually cut. Even if you get an ending for the Jarl, he still disappears after the conversation and is never seen after that point, which doesn't really feel right for this game. Also, directly outside his boat, you can pick up a quest item, these shackles, and these were clearly meant for something at some point, but have no actual purpose in the game as it is. Anyway, moving on from Harold, another cool little thing that takes place after the quest is that when you eventually get around to going to the feast if you helped Hjalmar first, your conversation with Crach is changed to account for that. This is how the quotes usually sound.
I've one more matter to broach. My children. You remember Hjalmar? Well, he swore an oath to kill the giant of Undvik. Set off and has yet to return. Whereas Cerys announced that she's to set off on an adventure of her own.
If either Hjalmar or Cerys need help, I'll help them.
And if you've already helped Hjalmar, the dialogue is changed to reflect that.
I've one more matter to broach. My child, my lass. You remember Cerys? Well, recently she declared she must set off on an adventure to bolster her chances of winning Skellige's crown.
I'll talk to Cerys. Count on it.
Finally, I wanted to briefly talk about Vigi and Folan at Kaer Morhen and what happens to them after. They will both accompany Hjalmar there if you saved them, although they aren't necessary for the full crew achievement. Each of them will also greet you with a couple of quotes if you interact with them.
Get ready, Folan. Wild Hunt's near.
So Ragnar Rog is upon us.
Get ready, Folan. Wild Hunt's near.
The Wraiths of Morhen. Hjalmar and I've bested worse buggers than that.
Hunt'll be here soon.
Head Cerys upon us. The final age, the time of the end.
Hunt'll be here soon.
Now we've but to listen for the sound of Heimdall's horn.
During the battle, they can both be found fighting the Wild Hunt next to Hjalmar. Sadly, Vigi actually dies during this battle, and I tried, but there's no way to see it happen. After the battle is over, his glossary entry just updates saying he fell in battle at Kaer Morhen. Also, I have devastating news for the die-hard community of Folan fans. I know they're a passionate bunch, but he is also supposed to die at Kaer Morhen. His glossary entry just doesn't update for some reason. In the files, he does have an additional entry that just isn't working that says, in order to pay the White Wolf back for saving his life, Folan set out with Hjalmar to defend Kaer Morhen against the Wild Hunt. There, far from his native land, Folan fell in battle while fighting side by side with his friends. This apparently used to work. His entry would update after the Battle of Kaer Morhen to account for his death, but for some reason it doesn't function anymore. I did test it for this video, and it just doesn't update at all. It doesn't say whether he lived or died, which makes me think this is a bug. I mean, maybe CDPR changed their minds and decided to leave his fate open-ended, but he can't be found at Vesemir's funeral, so not looking good. I think it's clear that Vigi and Folan are kind of an afterthought in general when it comes to this part of the game. I mean, Hjalmar doesn't even mention them once the battle is over, which is a little weird. You'd think he would at least mention Vigi, who definitely dies. Anyway guys, that is going to do it for today's video. If you haven't subscribed and you like this type of content, I would really appreciate it. And I also know that leaving a like helps get these videos out there, so I'd appreciate that as well. I think I have like 35 or 40 hours into this video. It was one hell of an undertaking. Also, I really do enjoy reading comments and feedback from you guys. Hopefully a video like this isn't going too far in breaking down a quest. I really thought the Lord of Undvik was interesting, and this quest just has so many moving pieces, so I don't know, hopefully I kept you entertained. Finally, if you want updates on what I'm working on, when videos are coming, etc., I did start a Twitter where I've been trying to update people on what videos are in the works. With that said, thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next one.